Yeah, hello. Good evening, everyone. I'm Andreas Bieler. I'm one of the co-directors of the Independent Center for the Study of Social and Global Justice. And it's my pleasure to chair this evening's CSSGJ seminar and to welcome our speaker, Sarah Kassan. An exciting talk ahead. There's often the discussion that, oh, the platform work, it really immobilizes, it really disempowers workers. And I think tonight we will see in the presentation of Sarah Kassan that there are always opportunities to wage resistance. Now, Sarah Kassan received her PhD in political economy in 2020 from the University of Tübingen in Germany. Her interests evolving around labor struggles and resistance came together in her dissertation stroke thesis on the alienation and agency of workers in the platform economy, delving more concretely into Amazon's platforms. And of course, that has become now an almost global feature, Europe and North America, the working practices and the way of how these supply chains are organized by Amazon. Sarah's current teaching and research foci center around workers' working conditions, different forms of labor organization, and the intersectional dimensions of the labor movement. Excitingly, she has just published recently her book on work and alienation in the platform economy, Amazon and the Power of Organization. And tonight's presentation, tonight's seminar will be on that book. Now, we proceed in the usual manner. Sarah will have up to 45 minutes maximum for her presentation, and that will then leave us with still 35 to 40 minutes for questions, comments, and discussions. Sarah, welcome to CSSGJ. Over to you for your presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Andreas, for the great introduction. I hope you can see my screen and you can hear my voice. I am excited to dive right in. Thank you all for taking the time out of your evenings or wherever you are in the world to listen to this. It is a pleasure to get the chance to present this work. As Andreas has highlighted, this is a reworked and updated and edited version of my PhD dissertation that I recently published with Bristol University Press. Now, I would like to dive right in, and one of my favorite activities when presenting is take a look at how has Amazon been featured recently in the headlines. Now, I would ask you to take a look first at the top left corner, this headline about Amazon planning to go big on physical grocery stores. Now, this headline got my attention because it shows, we think of Amazon a lot in terms of e-commerce, but it shows also this intent of Amazon to, go back to the brick and mortar stores and to also, grow possibly its market share. The bottom left corner, this one is about Amazon deploying fleets of self-driving robo-taxis on Californian streets. And I chose this one because it shows that Amazon is pretty much at the forefront of technological development. And and this would obviously play a role then when it comes to its already existing platforms. Now, if we go to the bottom right, this one says the Amazonification of buying a new car. And I think that nowadays this term of Amazon, it's not just the company anymore, but it's really a noun, a verb of itself that is being used almost to portray sort of a form of tailorization of the work, of logistics, and really a model of efficiency that other companies may look to. The top right corner, we see a headline from last month. Oh, now it's already May, so almost 2 months ago. About Amazon's job cuts, and Amazon joins other, tech companies and obviously platforms that have been, laying off or, firing almost a lot of their thousands of their workers over the course of the last few months, which, we could discuss in relation to perhaps overgrowing or overhiring during or because of the pandemic. Now, in the middle, this is a very recent headline just from a few days ago, from last week, because we've seen a lot of labor organizing coming out of Amazon warehouses in the UK. And, thinking back when I first started my fieldwork, Amazon in the UK was incredibly, we were hearing that from GMB union members, that it was incredibly difficult to strike and so forth because of the industrial relations. And, it's a beautiful moment to see really how this agency comes together. And now not only have they striked, but they are bidding for formal recognition. And also there is news that there will be 2 more warehouses in the UK, in fact, that are going on strike. So what we see with this slide is really Amazon is all around us. It's almost impossible to go a day without Amazon being featured in the news in one way or the other. Now, another activity I like to do is to take a look at their share prices. Now, this is an overview of over the course of the last 5 years. I'd like to draw your attention to 2018. It looks relatively low to where it was during the years of the pandemic here. However, in 2018, this is really the time when Jeff Bezos became at the time the richest human being. So it is telling of how much financial capital, let's say, Amazon already accumulated then. And it also shows how this boomed during the course of the pandemic. So if we would want to identify something like a so-called winner of the pandemic, Amazon would absolutely be featured at the top of that list. Now, another graph that we can take a look at is the number of Amazon employees. Here, I'd like to draw your attention firstly to 2016. I started my PhD in 2016, so this is basically the graph that we had. So if you kind of ignore everything that follows and just look at this part zoomed in, we could already detect an exponential growth of Amazon. But really, afterwards, we see that growth and also the hirings of Amazon taking on completely new dimensions. I would like to emphasize here that this graph by Statista does not include the subcontracted workers or the seasonal workers, which are absolutely essential for Amazon and especially its warehouses, because the seasonal workers are then hired during Q4. So it covers the time of Black Friday and the Christmas season, which, as you can imagine, is really absolutely central to Amazon's profit making. Now, from these different graphs, I'm referencing a lot the Amazon warehouses, but it is essential to highlight that Amazon is much bigger than its warehouses. Amazon started as an e-commerce platform, but absolutely central is Amazon Web Services, which is the cloud computing platform, and in fact has monopolized the cloud computing market. So I always encourage others to take a look at which websites or platforms they know that operate via AWS, Amazon Web Services, and quickly you will realize that it is, you may order or not order on Amazon, but it's incredibly difficult to navigate around Amazon if you are a user of the internet. Now, essentially, my work is about Amazon, but to me, Amazon represents so much more, and it represents so much more in the platform economy because, as I said, it is much bigger than just the e-commerce. So what will I be doing today? I would like to start off with a few points of reflection, what motivated this project, and just some foundations, also theoretically speaking. From there, I would really like to take a look at the 2 case studies. I've mentioned Amazon.com as the Amazon warehouses. However, the other example is Amazon Mechanical Turk, which may or may not be known to those of you who are listening to me. I tend to like to ask who here has ever heard of Amazon Mechanical Turk, and usually, unless you're speaking to other researchers of platforms on platforms, the minority know Amazon Mechanical Turk. Now, I've called it diving in, but really what I'm doing today would just be like hinting at, just shedding some light on these 2 cases, very much focusing on alienation and agency, and from there take a step back. So what does all of this tell us about the platform economy and possibly the larger economy? Now, in terms of my motivations, this whole project was sparked by my PhD. And although I had initially started off with a very different project, I found myself increasingly getting attracted to platforms. And coming from political economy, but really the perspective of labor, I realized that, you know, it's important to, or it's interesting or worthwhile to investigate the platform economy, because although platforms don't represent possibly the largest portion of labor forces on a global scale, platforms themselves are quite the trendsetters on the labor market. So, you know, other companies look to Amazon, and platforms are forerunners in implementing something like algorithmic management, which I'll get to later. And so with this project, really, I wanted to dive into the working conditions, but as Andreas has also emphasized, you know, not stopping at that, because I wanted or hope to shed light on the different forms of resistance and labor organizing that happens at Amazon and the different platforms. So if we take a look at the platform economy, as every other development in our economy and capitalism, is obviously bound to the social, political, economic, and technological conditions. What I always say is no coincidence that we see Amazon and Google erupting during the 1990s. You know, this was the time of the dot-com boom. So everyone was getting excited over the internet and almost assuming that, you know, the internet was going to fundamentally reorganize, not just the economy, but society at large. Now, Amazon and Google at the end, they didn't, let's say, fundamentally reorganize workers. You know, warehouse workers at Amazon may share a lot of similarities with warehouse workers elsewhere and logistics workers. So it was really taking this marketplace online. Then we had the dot-com bubble burst, and here, you know, obviously this affected the access to something like venture capital or going public on the stock market. And so we see new forms or new kinds of platforms erupting. Think here of what is now Meta, but what was Facebook, Amazon Mechanical Turk, Amazon Web Services. Now, interestingly enough, both MTurk and AWS were created in relation to Amazon.com, the e-commerce platform. So with Amazon Mechanical Turk, what happened was, as Amazon was expanding, you know, there was additional labor needed in order to make sure, you know, something like the right book cover was assigned to the right book, and or that, you know, checking that things weren't posted twice and so forth. And quickly they realized that, you know, as it is historically, human labor is cheaper. And so we can imagine Amazon Mechanical Turk almost as a digital outsourcing platform, which I will get to later. And Amazon Web Services was developed because Amazon was expanding so much that it needed more cloud infrastructure, which also includes the servers. And instead of going elsewhere, they really created and developed their own infrastructure, which now, you know, is accessible to others and not just Amazon. Now, with the 2008 economic crisis, we see new conditions coming about. You can think here of rising unemployment and an increased deregulation of labor market, more precarity on the labor market. And so I would say it is not a coincidence that a platform like Uber or Deliveroo, food delivery platforms, boomed after the 2008 crisis. I just realized I skipped a slide, sorry. Now, if we take a look at the literature on platforms, the literature, honestly, now is there's so much coming out, and I am incredibly relieved to have my book out now as well. I hope that one day I could be regarded amongst this great work by scholars. Now, over here, we have the work of Sabrina Apicella, Das Prinzip Amazon. Sabrina Apicella, I would argue, is the first researcher to really systematically analyze warehouses. She focused on Germany and conducted, you know, surveys and interviews with workers, trying to really understand why do workers strike and not strike. So since then, there's been other books on Amazon that have popped up, such as Alessandro Del Fanti's work or the edited volume, but we can also place Amazon within the larger platform economy. Now, I've mentioned platforms a few times, but what does it actually describe? Essentially, these are mediators or companies that mediate via the infrastructure of the internet, and they mediate labor products and labor services. And they come to depend on things like algorithmic management and network effects. Essentially, the more people who use a platform, the more it becomes valuable. People were joining Facebook because it almost felt like everyone was on Facebook, and this was a way of communication. So here, the network effects are essential. And going back to the different conditions that are out there, it really shows that the dissemination of the internet was crucial for that, for instance. So Amazon, let's say, is a platform that organizes workers in a more traditional way. So it's location-based. You have to be in the warehouse to labor, and your wage is more or less a traditional hourly wage. So this is the wage you're going to get per hour working at this warehouse. However, within the larger scope of the platform economy, or there's been work describing as platform capitalism, this is not the only form of labor and labor or organizing labor. If you think of Uber and you think of food delivery workers, these are gig workers, which means that traditional hourly wage is replaced with a piece wage. So, you get paid per delivery that you deliver. So you are dependent on each delivery. Of course, you don't receive the whole wage of, let's say, the order that someone orders, but a portion of that. So this is really what is referred to as the gig economy. Now, these workers are also location-based because, as an Uber driver or as a food delivery worker, I am bound to the city, the local context I am in, the place where I'm delivering. However, there are also platform workers who are web-based and gig workers. Here, I asked you to take a look at this book cover by Gray and Surrey, Ghost Work, which essentially discusses all the web-based labor that happens behind the screens, where basically workers do online tasks and they get paid by task. And here they really emphasize how technology doesn't replace workers, but it displaces workers. And we can think of this within the larger scope of human labor behind technology. I think this has been really at the headlines, or in the headlines now, with ChatGPT, where there was this excellent article by the Time showing that ChatGPT was relying on workers in Kenya who were receiving less than $2 to make ChatGPT less toxic. So here, this is another example of how human labor is behind technology. And in this case, human labor is essential for the development of AI, essentially, which I'll talk about in my case study of Amazon Mechanical Turk. So moving on to the question, what am I really doing then with my work? Essentially, I'm saying, or I'm agreeing with researchers who say, we need to differentiate between platforms. There is such a wide diversity in how platforms are organizing workers. So I mentioned right now, you could be location-based, or you could be web-based. You could receive a piece wage, or you could receive a time wage. And essentially, I want to understand, how does this alienate workers? And at the same time, how do these different dimensions impact how workers organize and claim their agency? Of course, we have to consider this within the larger political context, political economic context in which workers are located. And I honestly think that it is such a almost a privilege as a researcher to be doing this kind of research right now, because I think the platform economy is a part in the economy where we can see such a vibrant labor movement coming about, and we see different forms of organization, both traditional and alternative. And perhaps this is something that we can take away from the platform economy and extend it to the larger economy we live in. So let's dive into my two case studies. The first one is the Amazon warehouse workers, then Amazon Mechanical Turk. Both of these case studies are based on my own field work, and both of them are based on my original field work. And when it comes to the Amazon warehouse workers, this was based on conducting interviews with workers. Given that I'm located in Germany, I was speaking to warehouse workers in Germany. It is worth noting that that Germany is, up until now at least, the largest market for Amazon outside of the US. So that's an essential aspect to studying Germany. And at the same time, it is the country with the longest Amazon labor struggle. In fact, I think it was this last weekend marked the 10-year anniversary since the very first strike at an Amazon warehouse anywhere in the world. Amazon Mechanical Turk, the access to the field was a bit different, and I'll get to that in a bit. So to just talk shortly about the theoretical lens and foundation upon which this work is based. You know, alienation is a very big word, but the question arises, how do you study alienation in a systematic way? In no way did I want to, you know, hand out surveys and ask workers on a scale from 0 to 10, how alienated do you feel? But instead, I wanted to understand more the different forms of alienation, how they interact with one another. So in a way, the labor activity tells us about how am I alienated and disconnected from the work that I do, the product I produce, my existence outside of work, and my relationship to other human beings. However, as much as I am fascinated by alienation, I think it would be a mistake to stop the analysis there, because it would almost strip workers of their agency and their ability to resist and their consciousness. So I therefore look at the power resources approach and analyze the structural power, meaning, you know, the leverage workers have on the labor market and how they might pursue in something like industrial action at work, how they come together and organize collectively, what kind of institutional rights can they push for, and also how they're able to take their labor struggle and expand it on a wider scale. And of course, Andreas Biela has also published extensively on this and was also an inspiration for this work. Now, diving into the first case study of Amazon warehouses, this is a quote that I heard repeatedly in my interviews with Amazon warehouse workers. And in fact, this has actually become a slogan almost of the Amazon warehouse worker labor movement: I am not a robot. Now, if we take a look at the warehouses, I think these three pictures are quite representative in a way of these different dimensions of alienation. You have to imagine a warehouse in size, almost something like an IKEA. It's quite large, and it's very tailorized, meaning that it's really broken down to different steps in circulation. So workers here don't produce products, they circulate products, meaning an order comes in and you need to get that out to the customers. So essentially, when the products come into the warehouse, there's someone who is prepping the order, like kind of digitally putting it onto the system. Then there is a worker who stows the item. So they're assigned specific rows between which they move, and they just stow away the product. It's a chaotic stowing system, which means you don't actually have to go and put all the books beside each other, but in fact, you just place it where there is space. And this is efficient because once you go to a shelf, you know, you're not likely to have to spend time to make sure you really got the correct book, because maybe there's only one book in that slot, along with a teddy bear and a CD, for example. From there, once the order comes in, there is a worker who is the picker. The picker tends to walk the most, something between 15 to 20 kilometers per day, to pick the different items around the warehouse. And then there's finally a packer who takes these items, puts them in a box, and places them on the conveyor belt. So you can see there's a very clear division of labor. Now, in terms of alienation, things that are exciting to study is, for example, that the regime of surveillance and productivity that exists. Workers here receive a units per hour rate that they're meant to fulfill, and they're exposed to both social surveillance through their managers. So this is where I say it's quite traditional, but brought into the 21st century, because we have also a digital panopticon. So essentially, technology features here in how you are able to surveil workers, and you can see how long essentially they take per task. Now, to imagine really how fast, let's say, this moves in the warehouse. In Germany, in my interviews, I would hear a picker say, oh, you know, my rate is somewhere between 100 and 150 items per hour. So this already means, you know, you're picking something like 2 to 3 items per minute. And then you would hear warehouse workers in Poland say, oh, our number, at least in a union meeting where I was, is 240. So they work they have twice as much or twice as high of a productivity rate than the German workers, or the workers in Germany, let's say. And then there were numbers coming out of the US as high as 400. So you can really see that there is this regime of productivity that is meant to be maintained. And this is what workers are exposed to on a daily basis. The picture in the middle, I think, represents to me the alienation of fellow humans. This is a slogan that is in Amazon warehouses, stating work hard, have fun, make history. So having just portrayed or presented what the working day looks like, this is the slogan that workers are exposed to. While there is some sort of like Amazonian work culture, reminds us a bit of the work culture in Google, it's very much individualistic and based on your individual performance. Now, what is the agency? How have we seen workers organize? Globally. In my specific case, as I've said, the research was mainly done in Germany, the field work. Now, to analyze this, we can say that workers, in terms of their structural power, it's quite weak, at least the marketplace power, because as a worker, Amazon's willing to hire you as long as you're going to be willing to do the work. It's not a high wage form of work and what the market would regard as high skilled. So as long as you are of age, pretty much you can get hired. However, the workplace power, so the ability to disrupt and stop an Amazon warehouse is potentially quite high, because if all the warehouse workers go on strike at the same time, they could really disrupt Amazon. However, you need to keep in mind here, with all of the forms by which Amazon warehouse workers organize, that we are talking here about Amazon, the union buster. And Amazon instrumentalizes political economic conditions as well as, hiring all sorts of firms to make sure that workers or to undermine labor organization. In Germany, basically, if you were to go on strike in a specific warehouse, because it's a decentralized network of warehouses, it means, the order could be shifted somewhere else in the country. However, it's not just within the country, but also transnationally, because the Polish warehouses, for instance, initially opened and were up until 2021, basically almost exclusively being used for the German market. So what do you do when you organize a national strike, but then you can ship the orders from Poland? So there's a lot of to say about the transnational organization of workers. And in fact, unionists and workers have said that this is a battle that has to be won transnationally. In terms of the institutional power, German workers in Germany can unionize, and they can also go on strike. Here we know that this happens once they receive a permanent contract. Institutional power then is demonstrated through sort of the achievements they were able to gain through works councils, such as decentralized break rooms. And when it comes to societal power, I would argue that the societal power of Amazon workers is really growing. Here you see at the bottom this little map of the world, and this is a screenshot from this campaign called Make Amazon Pay campaign, which is more than 80 unions, NGOs, different organizations that come together and say, we have to hold Amazon accountable. In fact, today they posted that they're also in solidarity with the writers that are on strike in the US. So it's really about the global dimension. And this is a screenshot of basically during the last Black Friday, where in the world you had some sort of campaigning or solidarity expressed with in the larger scope of the Amazon organizing campaign. So you can see there is a global dimension there. Now let's look over to the completely different case study here, where I said that, Amazon warehouse workers, in the end, the working conditions they're exposed to and the forms of organizing, we can, to a certain extent, understand it in a traditional sense. Now, when it comes to Amazon Mechanical Turk, we really need to think beyond the traditional. So this is a quote that I received in one of the surveys I had posted online by a worker, asking them, why do you do this kind of work? You're working from behind your screen, the wage you can get per task can be as low as 1 cent per task, or rather, it could also be 0, because sometimes those posting the tasks may in the end reject your work, and then you will get 0 payment. And then one worker said, I can work when I want and not work when I want. Now, what is Amazon Mechanical Turk? I've chosen, this is a screenshot of a task back in February. This is what a task will look like. Hey, you haven't accepted this HIT yet, a HIT. This stands for Human Intelligence Task. So you are literally on this platform because you're a human being. And here the task is, what is the item? The idea is you describe it in as much information as you can. Maybe you can see what the size is, what the color is, who the producer is, and so forth, what the material is. And interestingly enough, oh, I keep skipping, I apologize. I went back and tried to see how much were you paying? Were you getting paid for this task? And it's the bottom task here, tell us what this item is, and they actually pay you 8 cents per task. Now, this is the interface of my interface as a worker, and you can see I actually don't even qualify for this task. I only qualify for the the first 2 tasks, which are market research surveys. So the more you work, the more you can qualify for your task, which is essential because while these tasks here are showing a few cents per task, you can find tasks that are also for a few dollars. But these small or these low-paying tasks tend to flood the market in a way, because you can see here how many people are supposed to be doing this task. This one, for instance, is close to 31,000 people, whereas maybe a $5 task is being just, you just need 20 people to do that task. Now, Amazon Mechanical Turk, the term comes from the Mechanical Turk. This is a picture in the middle of the Mechanical Turk. Now, this was an 18th century automaton that was basically touring the world, playing chess against people like Napoleon. Essentially, it is, as you can see, a very Orientalist depiction, also reflecting the Orientalist assumptions of the time, rather an Oriental chess player who is supposed to be a robot here. And the idea is here you would have the chessboard and someone would be sitting and playing against this, what they have constructed as the Turk. And it would almost look like it's a robot, but actually you had someone sitting inside moving these pieces. And thus, Amazon Mechanical Turk took over that name, saying that essentially MTurk is artificial intelligence. So, it almost looks like it's AI, but it's artificial because there's human beings behind it. So essentially, the tasks on MTurk are things like, or when I was laboring, it really felt like the only reason I'm doing this work is because I'm a human being. So watching a video and then it asked me, how do you feel? Were you angry? Were you happy? Or another task that's asking me to digitalize a receipt, or basically tracing different 2D and 3D objects. Or, think of these tasks of detecting which of these pictures are, where do you see the cat? And then you see there's a picture of an instrument, then another animal, then a cat, then a tree, and you're supposed to click on the cat, which makes you really realize that this is primarily going to be used as, data. And once you have that data set, you can use it for machine learning algorithms to train AI. So hence, this is where AI comes in. You are laboring behind your screen somewhere across the world. We know that tasks are primarily posted in the global north, and by and large, web-based work is primarily done by those in the global south. When it comes to MTurk, the workers are primarily in the US and India, because these are also the 2 countries where you can get paid, get the payment on your bank account, versus others who would basically get almost Amazon credit that you can use as Amazon gift certificates and then use again on their Amazon e-commerce platform. So there's a real alienation happening here, because you don't know who's hiring you. They can be anonymous. You don't know what the task is being used for in the end. Like if I'm clicking on a picture of a cat, who is actually using this data and for what? I don't know. And also, I have no way to connect with other people on the platform because it's just me. I have no idea who else is online at that time. So this could get us to think about, but how can workers actually organize? Now, the thing is, if you think in terms of traditional unionizing or traditional strikes, that is almost close to impossible. Working at a lower pace, so individual forms of resistance, is also almost contradictory to the gig economy, because if I work at a slower pace and I'm being paid by piece and only by the piece, then very quickly I might receive a low rating, a low approval rating, and be essentially fired from the app or fired from the platform. Having said that, this does not mean that workers don't express their agency, but they do it, I would say, in alternative ways. Structurally speaking, workers have low leverage on the labor market. Anyone can do this from across the world. Also, workplace power as a strike is really difficult, given also the that, you know, if you don't do the task, someone else across the world will. In terms of associational power, these workers are essentially independent contractors, so they don't even have the worker status, similarly to, in a lot of countries still, food delivery workers, for instance. So here we have to shift our attention and think of this in more alternative ways, imagining that workers, in fact, instrumentalize essentially the infrastructure that alienates them to create things like online communities, to share pieces of advice. Now, this is a screenshot from a Reddit thread from February, essentially saying, you know, just getting started, wondering where to go, what to do, etc. And this is essentially a thread that tells workers, here are some tips as to how to best navigate the platform. There's another example called Turk Opticon. This was created by researchers at the time, Lily Irani and Six Silberman, who turned this panopticon on the head. They said, you know what, workers are getting rated on the platform. It's time that workers rate those who actually hire them. And by doing so, based on different criteria, workers almost give them a rating. And based on that later, you can go on this website, on this plugin, and see, oh, this requester, based on their name that is on Amazon Mechanical Turk, you know, there's a high probability they won't pay you. So they might reject your task and you're going to get 0 in the end. So, you know, it's almost as in to tell each other, avoid this person or this requester, and it's better to go elsewhere to another requester who's going to pay you. Now, you could say that workers here, why would they do this? Because essentially, the conditions are very precarious. Depending on where you are in the world, a single wage of a few dollars can have an even more, even higher value to you given the exchange rate. But essentially workers, you know, this is a form of solidarity. They're coming together, they're exchanging tips, and they're telling each other how to better navigate this, which I think is worth taking seriously. When it comes to the societal power, I would say this is something that's been growing in recent years. Compared to the Amazon warehouse workers, which were very much and are very much on the media represented and spoken about and reported on, Mechanical Turk was rather a development in the media in the recent years. You can find articles on the BBC and a lot of other pages that talk about Amazon Mechanical Turk, but essentially Amazon Mechanical Turk was first an academic interest, and that's because academics use Amazon Mechanical Turk also for their surveys. And that's what led to the development of sort of like ethical guidelines for researchers to do research on Amazon Mechanical Turk. So this was a lot of information. And now I'd like to take a step back. So what is Amazon really telling us, or how is it helpful to study Amazon and then place it within the larger platform economy and then placing this within the larger economy? So if we go back essentially to the theoretical foundation I had presented, essentially what I do in my book and what I argue is that the nature of the platform, the nature of the work how they interact with one another hold implications both for the working conditions, what happens on the shop floor, meaning how their workers are alienated, but also carrying implications for their working conditions and how they're individualized, possibly fragmented as a workforce. But then keeping in mind that workers have class consciousness. I'd like to also emphasize here that this is obviously coupled with, you know, their racialized subjectivity, with their gendered subjectivity. In fact, in the platform economy, depending on which platforms you're speaking of, these are powered by the labor of migrant workers. And so workers come together because of these shared experiences on the labor market and at work. We've seen this in Amazon, in food delivery work, and in many other platforms as well. Now, the idea is that these two dimensions also hold implications for their power resources, so how they actually express their agency, and shed light on both the possibilities, but also obstacles to organizing here. And again, taking a further step back and thinking about, it's not just the political economic condition that undermines here, but really how capital organizes the workers, how platforms instrumentalize technology here in this specific case, but also emphasizing how workers push against this and in fact organize and resist. So now placing Amazon, the larger platform economy, I think with these two cases of Amazon warehouses and the Amazon Mechanical Turk workers, we have those 4 dimensions being covered: location-based, web-based, traditional hourly wage, and a gig wage. And so we can almost take a step back and see, where else do we see this on the labor market? How do platforms produce new trends, but also reproduce trends on the labor market? So obviously the division of labor and precarity, this is not an invention of the platform economy, but the platform economy is reproducing this. But I would say a new trend that has come from the platform economy and is absolutely central to the platform economy is algorithmic management. This idea that I am being managed by technology at the end of the day. If an Uber driver's rating falls below a specific stars, then they get kicked off the app. So essentially, it's like the app is their manager. And this obviously carries implications for how do you organize and against whom are you organizing? How do you reach that person or that capital, let's say? At the same time, we see specific trends, or it can be telling of the labor movement. I definitely believe that the platform economy is one of those examples in the larger economy where we see, this vibrant, increasingly vibrant terrain of labor organizing that can happen in traditional and alternative ways. It can be also through top-down unions, but also grassroots unions. Think here of, the Amazon Labor Union that won the first election in Staten Island last year, and so forth. So to wrap up, I'd like to conclude with a quote here from the book saying, just as the conditions of the platform economy need to be understood historically and holistically, so too does the agency of workers. The form and appearances by which workers express this agency similarly co-evolve with the material and technological conditions, both of the platforms and of the larger political economic context. So in a way, we have to historicize platforms. We have to understand them within the larger scope of the economy, but in the same way, we have to do that when we study workers, because the labor movement is not a white male labor movement. But with the platform economy, we see with platform workers that it is an intersectional labor movement. And on that note, I'd like to thank you all for your attention.